Welcome back to Full Court Faith. And if you're new here, we want the Bible, our faith, our relationship with Jesus to be every part of our lives. So when you're in basketball and you're pressing the full court, you want to cover the entire court, not half of it, not a third of it, the entire court, every inch. And we want every inch of our lives to be dedicated to following Christ. So that's what we're about here. And today we're kind of wrapping up our series, mini-series, whatever you want to call it, our discussion on kings. And we're going to close out with Jeroboam and Rehoboam, and then also maybe a snippet of here's what you'd expect if you read the rest of it, because we're not going to go through it all, Johnny. That would take about a year. So we can't afford the time to do that, but we encourage you guys to check it out. So we're going to get to that discussion right now. So to recap, what we have here is we have a group of people who were following God and God-appointed leaders. And at some point, they started going, you know what? We want a king like these other nations. It looks really cool. And they seem to be getting wealthy and conquering people. We want that. And also a part of it's like lack of faith. I want a human I can see and talk to in person rather than a God that I can't see and have to trust that he's there and that he's working. And then Samuel, God's prophet, goes, guys, I don't think you want that. Bad idea. And God says, you know what, Samuel? No, let them have their king. So God appoints King Saul. And King Saul, whether he starts off well or not, that's up for you to decide, but he does not finish well. And he lets pride infiltrate his heart. He becomes crooked and twisted, and then he falls. Then we get David right after him. David is a man after God's own heart. He makes some mistakes, but he repents, he confesses, he makes it right. Then we end up with David's son Solomon, who I think started out really well, known for his wisdom. Then he succumbs to things like money, power, sex, and we covered all that in the last few weeks. That brings us to today. Johnny, I want you to give us a character card, like a video game character card, on Jeroboam and Rehoboam. Where'd they come from? A little summary of who they are, and we'll just go from there.
Sure. I love your summary of Saul, David, Solomon. That's great. So we get to Jeroboam, Rehoboam. Solomon is the king of a united Israel, and Solomon's heart is led astray, and he's worshiping other gods under the influence of his wives' cross-faith marriages. And because of that, the Lord tells him that I'm going to take the kingdom away and give it to your servant. At the same time, there's a servant of Solomon by the name of Jeroboam from the tribe of Ephraim, which is also, if you remember Israel's Old Testament history, the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Ephraim are often battling for who's the leader. So David's family is from Judah. This guy named Jeroboam's from Ephraim, which is important because that has a lot of influence on the rest of the tribes. Solomon puts him in position of leadership because he's really good. But then Solomon learns that there's a prophecy that God's going to give the kingdom to Jeroboam, so Solomon wants to kill him, and he flees for refuge in Egypt. He's in exile in Egypt. Meanwhile, Solomon dies. Solomon has a son named Rehoboam, who is the heir to the throne. Solomon's son Rehoboam is about to be crowned king, but the rest of the country goes and finds Jeroboam. He comes out of Egypt, and they say, hey, we need to list our grievances to the king. We weren't happy with Solomon, but we really couldn't do anything about it because he's too powerful, so now we're going to list our grievances to his son, Rehoboam. And we want you, Jeroboam, to be our spokesman. So Jeroboam represents the leaders of Israel, and he says, hey, Rehoboam, your father was too hard on us. He made our life too hard. We need you to kind of lighten the load. We'll still serve you, but you need to lighten the load. And then Rehoboam says, give me 3 days. Let me think about it. I'm going to sit on it, talk to my counselors, and I'll get back with you. So in the meantime, Rehoboam seeks the counsel of the elders, who were the elders who counseled his father, and they said, you know what? You need to listen to Jeroboam. He's right. Your father was too hard, and if you lighten the load now, they will serve you forever. Rehoboam apparently didn't like that counsel, because then he goes to his buddies and he says, what do you guys think? And they say, totally the opposite. Like, that guy, how disrespectful is Jeroboam that he would question your authority at the very beginning of your reign? You need to make a statement and say, if you thought my dad was hard, I'm going to be way harder. So then they come back, Jeroboam, what's your answer? And Rehoboam goes, basically, you thought my dad was hard, I'm going to be way harder than him. And it says that he forsook the counsel of the elders, and then the consequences of all that is Jeroboam and Israel said, well, fine, we don't want anything to do with you guys. You guys can take care of yourself. We're going to have our own kingdom. So then 10 tribes go with Jeroboam to the north, and 1 tribe, Judah, goes with Rehoboam to the south. A few verses later, we see that Benjamin joins them too in the south. So that's kind of your cliff notes of how we get to Jeroboam and Rehoboam.
So what tribes were under each's command? So where did they all fall there?
So Judah and Benjamin are specifically with the south of Rehoboam, and all of the other tribes are with Jeroboam in the north. However, we see later on, because the Levites are scattered throughout, many of the Levites and the priests who are in Jerusalem at the temple still are with the south, with Rehoboam. And I think that some others start defecting later on because they see this counterfeit worship in the north. But to start with, I would say Judah and Benjamin, Rehoboam, and some Levites, and then everybody else, Jeroboam in the north.
Was there anything to the prophecies at the end of Genesis about Judah, Benjamin, that would have led them to end up where they were at, or was that just kind of how it split naturally?
I think there's probably a lot of factors, potentially like an alliance between the house of Saul and house of David. Even though there was a weird friction there, there was also like a lot of union there. You know, think of like the way that David honored Saul's house, and even the location of Jerusalem in the way that the inherited land was given out. Some of it, like the tribe of Benjamin claimed Jerusalem, but also the tribe of Judah claimed Jerusalem. It was like right on the border. So I think geographically that would play a factor too, that both Benjamin and Judah, of which Jerusalem was like right on the line of both of those tribes, could claim Jerusalem. So they both kind of stayed together.
How far apart are all these tribes? What you need to know about Johnny is my guy loves maps. He's a cartographer. And I'm just curious, is it something that like I can walk to each tribe, or it's like, man, if you get from one to the other, you're talking weeks journey?
I think, golly, I wish I remember specifically from Dan to Beersheba, north to south, but I want to say it's in the ballpark of 200 miles from north to south, so it's really not that big. It pales. I mean, the whole country could fit easily within the state of Illinois. I mean, probably half the state of Illinois. So it's a very small land compared to what we're used to, like the United States of America.
That kind of surprises me.
Yeah, they could walk most of the country, you know, in probably a few days.
That kind of surprised me because when I picture countries apart. That's just in my mind. If you said, all right, how far apart were these tribes? I'd say it's a several-day drive. But for it to be a several-day walk is interesting. So why do you think Jeroboam listened to the young advisors instead of the experienced elders?
It's easy to do this, but Rehoboam was the one who listened to him.
Rehoboam, right? Good correction.
Yeah,
my bad.
we're both going to do that. So I'm just to be accurate, and you do the same thing to me because I'm sure I'm going to do it. But I think he listened to the young guys because they told him what he wanted to hear because of pride. It's kind of like when I think about Rehoboam, what was his big fatal flaw as a leader? He was not humble. And even you could read about this in 1 Kings 12. And it says he did not listen to the elders, but he forsook their counsel. It was like, I don't want to hear that. And remember how we talked a lot about like humility as opposed to pride, and humility is being willing to listen. And I think that Rehoboam had so much pride, he did not want to listen to the advice that said, you know what, humble yourself, listen to your people, serve them, don't be selfish. And then his buddies are like, this is your time, man, you have money and power, like let's take advantage of it. And I think it was pride that ultimately led to his downfall, and the kingdom is taken away from him.
Okay, so I see that in today's society. It's not something that is Old Testament only as far as an issue, where I had wise counsel and I opted for my buddies or my echo chamber or whatever that looks like. How do you see that in your journey as you're becoming a more mature leader, and you've been doing pastoring for a while, and you probably counsel people that they have wise counsel and they have maybe some bad friends or someone like that that's telling them to do something else. Maybe it's family members. How do you see that unfold and as you've kind of journeyed through your career as a shepherder?
I think we've talked about this with staff or even as coaches, you want to have a wide bench, a wide range of voices that can cover your weaknesses, fill in your gaps. So I think it's really good for anybody, as a human being, to have multiple voices in your life, and hopefully voices as a Christian who are walking with the Lord. So I think it's good to have people who are in different generations in your life. Someone who's in their 70s who can speak into your life that you trust, who's walking with the Lord. Somebody in their 50s who's walking with the Lord. Even just getting the perspective, listening to someone younger than you. I always enjoy, I'm blown away when I talk to like a 20-year-old who's on fire for the Lord. And in a sense, like I'm in my 40s, and there's part of the pride that I need to push back of saying, man, what am I going to learn from this guy? And then I hear him talk about what he's doing. I'm like, oh my gosh, like that was awesome. Like I learned a lot from him. And just seeing like his passion and fire for the Lord, it's just motivating. So I think like generationally, there's wisdom in surrounding yourself with people who are from different perspectives, generations, backgrounds, even professions. Someone who's really good at this or that, and just learn. And like, what do you think? And I will say, as a Christian, like, doesn't mean that all of your advisors have to be Christians. However, I think there's so much wisdom and understanding. If you have Christ as a similar foundation, and if you have Scripture as the basis of which, like, this is truth, I want to submit to Scripture, then a person that is saying or giving you advice, and you have a similar core value of Scripture is the guide in my life, that gives a lot more credence to, I want to listen to more of what you have to say.
That's where discernment is really big, because I have received bad advice, believe it or not, from Christians before. I have received good advice from a non-believer before. I'm not saying to go do that, but I'm saying it has happened. And I think that's where discernment does kick in. We're told to discern between what's right and wrong, discern the spirits. And I think if you have a mentor that's telling you that something that's clearly wrong, like it's wrong. Like maybe you have a Christian friend in your life that's like really gossiping in your ear a ton, and it starts to turn you kind of against the other people. That's not right. Your discernment factor is required whenever we're talking about being counseled and being mentored. You seek out mentors who are giving you spiritual advice that are for you, that aren't trying to control or manipulate you. And I think it's something that is hard to quantify, or qualify as far as like what exactly it looks like, but when you see it. And I think that's what spiritual discernment is. So if you don't know what it is, then it's, hey, God, please help me discern of who's giving me my information and what they're telling me. And I think that should be a prayer that you pray. And I don't think many people pray for that. I think it's very important to know how to discern, especially, Johnny, in the age of AI, false teachings, all those things. The ability to discern between proper advice and improper advice is becoming more urgent as a skill, I think, now more than ever.
I agree 100%. And I would say, like, when you're listening to advice, there's a couple nuances. One, seek people who are seeking God and submitting to His Word. And then when they give you advice, I'm always weary of somebody who says, you need to listen to me, as opposed to someone who says, you need to listen to the Lord and submit to Him. And this is my opinion as I'm seeking the Lord. This is what I think in your situation, but you need to seek the Lord yourself, and you need to be guided by Him. And I'm much more weary of someone who says, you need to listen to me because I'm right, as opposed to someone saying, this is my opinion, but you really need to listen to the Lord yourself. You need to seek the Lord yourself.
You can see a lot in body posture and tone and how someone carries the conversation. If you're getting advice from somebody, but it seems more like a scolding or a yelling match or a pride factory, then maybe it's not the best. Like, for example, let's say we have pews at our church, and let's say I went up to you, Johnny, and I said, this is stupid. They hurt my back. They're so old. And I just came at you like crazy. Even if it's a good idea, you're probably going to go, that delivery was horrible. I'm out. And I'm not even listening to your idea. But if I came up to you and I said, hey, Johnny, just so you know, like, we're having a lot of back problems. And maybe we could consider chairs if it's in the cost. If it's not, that's fine. But I just want to offer you something there. I think having the proper delivery is so important, because I've seen people who have fantastic advice, but their delivery is terrible. And what do you do with that as someone that's listening? You're kind of tapping out and going, not interested, too aggressive, I'm out.
Well, I agree. I think something you said, that even the way you presented that, like the silly example of pews versus chairs. If someone says, hey, people are having back problems, as opposed to I'm having back problems, or if someone's complaining and saying, hey, I'm having back problems, well, let me go with you, or I'd encourage you to talk to the person. I think it's dangerous to lump people in your argument as opposed to this is a problem for me. And I see in Matthew 18, if there's a problem, you go talk to the person, right? So I think that's even just not only the tone of the way you deliver, but I think if it's a problem, make it a personal problem for me. And if it's not your problem, encourage that person to go talk to the source directly, as opposed to, well, people are saying. I think that can be a little bit dangerous in the way we present things too.
Right. I think that would fall under the category of manipulation, where I think you inadvertently are manipulating by saying that, because you're trying to almost peer pressure a solution out of it, instead of representing a genuine care or concern. Is there anything else? The only caveat I have that I wrote down was the Bible does tell us to respect our elders and listen to them and heed their warnings. But there's an important nuance there, that just because someone is older does not mean they're always right either. I think we're all fallible in nature. I think we all have the capacity to be right or to be wrong. And maybe, like you said, started off, there are young people that do teach you things. I remember coaching basketball. I learned so much from my kids. And it wasn't even like biblical. It's just like their joy, or how they carry themselves, or how they maybe handled a situation, where I was like, a 16-year-old just did that really well. So I should be able to, as a 20, 30-year-old, to do that well as well. So I think there is an important nuance to respect the elders, but also understand that anybody is capable of being wrong.
I agree. I think as a Christian, you should want to have conviction in your life where, one, you want to be biblical. As a biblical person, you want to be led by the Spirit and be able to make decisions personally based on your convictions that you feel like the Spirit is directing you in, that are in agreement with His Word. So sometimes people may have with the sincerity of their heart, a great conviction for them, but that may not be a conviction for you. And I think everybody has their own story, and everyone's accountable before the Lord of all of their decisions. So I don't think the Lord wants us to be robots, or even to say, well, so-and-so told me to do this, so I guess I did it, and it's his fault if it goes wrong. But it's like, hey, I should be seeking the Lord, praying about it, submitting to Scripture, being guided by the Spirit, and then taking responsibility for my own decisions and saying, right, you know what? This is what I wanted to do, not I'm doing it because they told me to. That's a very passive way of living. I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's the way God wants us to live.
Speaking of passivity, then we get to Jeroboam, who is a passive leader, and he leads with fear. He created the golden calves to worship, not necessarily because he wanted to, but the people wanted to. And he's like, who am I to stop you from worshiping who you want? Which, by the way, we do see that quite a bit today. Who am I to tell you how to? Well, that's a podcast for another time. Was this decision and his issue more about theology, politics, control? Where do you see that? Maybe all of them.
I see a ton of control and fear. When I think of Jeroboam, I think of fear-based leadership, and we always talk about you don't want to be a fear-based, fear-driven leader. You want to fear God, But even the decision to create the golden calves, in the passage in Kings, it says he was afraid, or he thought, if the people go back to Jerusalem to worship, their heart is going to go back to the southern kingdom, and I'm going to lose my kingdom, because they're going back and realizing the legitimate worship is in the southern kingdom, and they might have that brilliant idea of, well, then maybe the legitimate kingdom is in the southern kingdom. So to prevent that from happening, I'm going to create my own style of worship. And he set up golden calves in Dan to the north and Bethel to the south of where his kingdom was. and he told the people, you can worship there. You don't have to go back to Jerusalem. And he was doing that out of fear, and then out of popularity, he says, and if you want to be a priest, you can be a priest. And in the Mosaic law, the priesthood was limited to the family of Aaron within the tribe of Levi. So now Jeroboam is promoting this religious system that they have non-Levitical priests of saying, you know what, anybody can be a priest. And you don't have to go worship in the temple in Jerusalem the way the Mosaic law says. We can worship the way we want to. And I think that he was feeding into the ego of the people, and he was doing it to promote his own kingdom out of fear of losing it.
That brings me to my next point. And sometimes when you talk on these things, you say, I don't mean to offend. Very rarely you say, I mean to offend. In this point, I would say I mean to offend. I do see so many churches today, not so many. I've seen churches today kind of do that, where it's like, we're going to take a non-stance on this topic because we don't want to lose our growth of our church, the number of people coming in, our status in the community. We don't want to be blasted online. We want to be this young, hip, whatever it is. And it's interesting because going into ministry, I've paid attention to it more. I just didn't beforehand. Now I've looked forward a little bit more. I'm trying to see like what other churches are doing or what other communities are doing and things like that. And the more liberal areas you go to in the country, the more you see this, where you just have churches going, I stand for nothing. We all believe in Jesus. We should be good here, right? And that's really the approach that some of them take. And I see as a relative weakness there. And sometimes you're going to offend people. Jeroboam should have offended people. He should have said, no, we're not going to worship these idols. But he didn't. And I do think it's important to not go all the way to the other end of the spectrum and just offend everyone. Just be this hypercritical, you only talk about politics in your church. I think that's a mistake as well. But I do see a lot of passivity in leadership today.
Yeah, it's very easy to not want to make waves and to not take stances on certain things because you don't want to offend. And I don't think you should intentionally try to be a jerk. But I think we should seek to be biblical and seek to be faithful, seek to be humble, right?
Right. I think it's easy, the easy path for leaders when someone brings you a controversial topic to go, it's not my place to say. Where I think if specifically somebody asks you, it can be your place to say because they asked you a question. But maybe
there's a big there's a big difference. Sorry to interrupt. I just want to tug on this real quick. There's a big difference between going off from the pulpit and having a conversation with somebody in private when you can see the expression on their face and you can hear the tone of their voice and sense like the desire of their heart. Like, why are they genuinely asking me like a sincere question? Or are they just like wanting a sound bite and trying to catch you and make you look stupid, right? Yeah. Like, so I think like there's a benefit in having like a genuine conversation where you can be a little bit more transparent with your answer. But go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's how I operate is I attack things from both sides. I think there's a danger too, as well as people trying to do the gotcha, where they say, well, the church doesn't stand, make a statement. It's like, why do we have to make a statement on everything? Some things.
God's made a statement. This is his statement right here.
So anyways, and then there's another side of passivity that I see. And this is just from my experience of life and working with kids for the last 12, whatever years. And I see a lot of spiritual passivity in fathers across America, to where it can almost become mom leads the Christian conversations, mom leads the prayers, mom leads the spiritual development, and dad's just kind of there. I'll go to church, but I don't really want to. That's all that mushy stuff's not for me. The issue with that is anytime I see, we've talked about the statistics of fatherless homes and crime rates and all those things. If your dad's not actively a part of your life, you can actively not be a part of your kids' lives and still be in the same household with them. And I know that's crazy to say, but you can. And I don't want to, be labeled as sexist here. I think Moms can screw up too. But I'm specifically talking about, the leader of the home according to the scripture, and what passivity looks like can just be just doing nothing. Like you don't challenge your kids. You don't lead those conversations. And if I was who I was in my young 20s, I would be in that category, most of my 20s. And I've really learned to try to step into uncomfortable moments, uncomfortable conversations with my children, with Natalie, with friends, as far as like trying to lead spiritual development. And it's not a natural thing. It's uncomfortable. It's like lifting weights. It's hard at first to do that, but the more you do it, the easier it gets.
I agree. I think a big part of leadership is rejecting passivity. It's very easy as a man to be passive and to be tired and to be selfish. We're all selfish at our core, and we have to fight that and say, Lord, help me to be unselfish. So when I've had a long day at work and I come home and I'm tired and my kids are wanting my attention, my selfish desire is I just want to sit down and do nothing and just like do whatever I want to do. But that's not being a good leader. Like we need to reject the temptation of being passive and selfish and spend time and engage and talk to our kids and help out and what's going on in school. How can I help you in that? And take the initiative of, let's talk about the Lord and let me tell you about what I'm learning with the Lord. What are you learning about the Lord and what are you studying in Scripture and praying with your family? I think praying together as a family is a big deal for your family and the Lord guiding and leading and blessing your family, and also teaching and modeling to your kids the importance of your faith. And we talk about it a lot, more is caught than taught. And if your kids see that the Lord is important in your life and you're taking the time to share about Him with them, then there's a much greater potential that He will be more desirable in their life, that maybe they'll want Him to be important in their life because they see that He's important in your life.
Right. Part of our dinner time prayer things is sometimes I'll ask the boys, I want you to each tell me one person to pray for or one thing that's going to happen this week you want me to pray for. And it is uncomfortable. It is like pulling a tooth. They do not like, they don't want to do it. It's like, Dad, I don't want to do this. I just want to eat. I can't think of anything. One of my kids is always, I can't think of anything. And I make him do it because it's important to push through the uncomfortable. That's really important. Yeah. And here's where I see it the most. I see it in church attendance. We'll hear a lot, I don't want to make my son or daughter uncomfortable. I don't want to push them away from Jesus by making them go to church. Don't you make them go to school? Doesn't everyone's kid go to school like legally? I don't know many kids that enjoy it, and they go 7 days a week or 5 days a week. And I'm sure in the mornings they're like, I don't want to school. And the parents are like, get on the bus, get in the car, let's go. I'm curious how that's different. I'm just like, they do it because you told them to.
I used to push back on parents when I was in the youth pastor role, and I had one mom in particular that her son wouldn't come on Sundays, and it would be like a 9:30 Sunday school class. And I said, why isn't he coming to Sunday school? She goes, well, he needs to sleep. He's tired. And I said, it's at 9:30. And she goes, or at 9. I think at the time it was 9. I said, what time does school start? She goes, 8. I said, does he go to school at 8? Yeah. Well, why can't he go to church at 9? And you got to be careful, right? You got to be careful on the gentle pushing. But I also sometimes think we can not push enough and say, hey, okay, let's, as a parent, I want my kids to sleep in. I don't want them to have this burn against the church because they hated getting up to go to church. And it's like, you know what? There's certain things you need to do that are good for you. And then when you're an adult, you don't have to. When you're 18 and you're on your own, no, I'm not going to be there to tell you what to do. And I'll give you a quick story in my own life. Dad's a pastor, and I remember we had to go to Sunday school. And I'm glad I did, but there were times I didn't want to. And I remember my senior year, going to prom, my parents let me stay out crazy late. They said, okay, you need to be in by 3:30, which was a huge exception. Normally it was always before midnight. So they're like, okay, you can go to after prom at school, but you have to be at Sunday school at 9 o'clock the next morning. And I still came in at 3:30, but I was at Sunday school and I was exhausted. And I think it was Bob Booker. Bob Booker walked through the Bible, and he was trying to get us going here. Knew I was tired, but I'm glad. I'm glad I had parents that were like, you can go to prom and you can stay out late, but you're going to be at Sunday school at 9:00 tomorrow morning.
It's teaching you how to prioritize. It's teaching you how to prioritize your calendar. It really is. What would you say is one leadership warning from either of these two stories that you would take home with you?
With Rehoboam, be careful that you don't just do what you want to do, that satisfies your ego, and that you resist listening to many voices. It doesn't mean that they're always right. We talked about this already in the podcast today, but I think be willing to listen and then seek the Lord and pray on, Lord, help me to make the right decision. And then also with Jeroboam, Lord, give me the courage to follow you and not live in fear. Help me to obey you and leave all the consequences to you. And if I'm obeying you, I can live with the consequences. If I'm making decisions in disobedience to your word because I'm fearing what other people are thinking, that is a terrible way to live. That will eat you up on the inside, and I don't want to live that way. And I pray, Lord, help me not to be so driven by fear of man as opposed to a genuine, sincere fear of God. That's
really good. I really respect that. For me, it's just pride. I think, and I'll just go back to the rest of this podcast episodes we've talked about Saul, David, and Solomon. It just comes down to pride. Am I holding myself in more importance than the Lord and the Lord's calling for my life? And in every one of these situations, that's the central character is they valued themselves, their status, their wealth, their power, more so than the kingdom impact. And I think that is really important to understand. So, Johnny, close us out on Kings saga. So what would someone expect us to read if they went through the rest of Kings?
So the rest, you can read this in Kings, 1st, 2nd Kings, and 1st, 2nd Chronicles. Chronicles spends more time on the southern kingdom, and Kings does a little bit of both. There's about 20 kings in the north and the south, and I think there was about 8 kings who were good in the south in their 20 kings that they had. And in the north, who had also about 20 kings, there were 0 good kings. And it's interesting because for the rest of the lineage, there's the southern kingdom always is from the house of David, and from the north it's kind of a hodgepodge of whoever takes power. And really the two names that people are compared to, if they do well, they're in the south, they're compared to David. He walked in the ways of David his father, and he followed the Lord, and he obeyed his commands. In the north, when a king did poorly, it would say he walked in the ways of Jeroboam and followed in the sins in which he made Israel sin. So it's kind of scary that Jeroboam actually has a really long-lasting legacy over the rest of the kings of the north, because he's the one who led Israel astray, and it's saying he made Israel sin. So he's held responsible for influencing the rest of the kingdom to sin. So it's kind of scary that Jeroboam is almost the foil now to David.
The thing that surprises me every time I read through it is the age at which some of these kings were coronated. They're talking children. I'm thinking to myself, could I imagine my children being the king of a country?
Yeah, 8 years old. It's crazy.
It is crazy. I want to close this out with a youth sports story hour. However, it's kind of involving youth sports. Now, Griffin's Football League did start up, so I'm going to have a lot more stories in the near future because he starts his first game this weekend. And that's pretty exciting in the Price household. We love football. And but we just had the NCAA tournament. So if you're listening, we're recording a day after the championship game, which Michigan won. Spoiler alert. And a few days ago, Griffin he walks into our living room, our dinner table, and we're eating dinner. We're getting set up, and he goes, "I hate Michigan. We're rivals." And it took me a second because I was like, "What do you mean?" And I realized, okay, he likes Ohio State football, so he's really into the concept of rivals. And it made me think about just how natural that instinct is. Because you hate the Eagles, I hate the Bears. It's so bizarre to think that you just hate a team. It's just an organization that plays sports, and you just hate a team. So we're watching the NCAA tournament, and he is gung-ho rooting against Michigan. And also he's decided he is now a UConn fan as well. Okay, so he has made that decision. And we're watching the Illinois-UConn game with a bunch of diehard Illinois fans. And Griffin decides, and speaking of foils and Jeroboam, Griffin decides he is going to be the foil. He is going to be the WWE heel at this watch party. He is cheering so loud for UConn, and he is making it so uncomfortable because the Illini fans know they played terrible. They couldn't make a shot. And every shot they missed, which was a lot, Griffin two-arm pump in the air and goes, yes! I was like, oh my gosh.
No.
So, Johnny, we had a long conversation the car ride home about when to taunt, when not to taunt. So the rules are, if it's someone's favorite team you're watching with, you can't taunt. But if they're just simply rooting against the other team, whatever it might be, or they're neutral, go for it. And I had this conversation with our friend Dane, who accused me of being a bad influence, which I can't even fathom why he would say that. And I said I only taunt in scenarios where I'm watching with a non-fan of the team that's losing.
I don't agree that you actually follow that all the time because I've been with you in those situations. So
hold on,
I do think you are a bad influence in this part of. You're a great leader spiritually to Griffin, but you are a terrible example of trash talking too much sometimes.
Well, you know what's interesting? I have watched one Packers-Bears game with the Bears fan, and it was the most uncomfortable 3 hours of my life. It was a game where Chicago missed a game-winning field goal and we won. But believe it or not, I was so uncomfortable by his misery that I felt uncomfortable. So there are moments where even it's too much for me. However, if you have a situation like John, fair weather fan, roots for several different baseball teams, whoever's good. Maybe it's the Cubs, maybe it's the Yankees. Shout out John. And they're playing a playoff series against a Wisconsin team. I might wear the jersey of the other team to a church party the next day. Who knows? Is that taunting?
You're such a Milwaukee Brewers fan, aren't you?
Do you have anything about the NCAA tournament that you enjoyed this year? No, you're a Duke fan, which actually
I was heartbroken. So I was taking Jackson to a basketball event, and we left at halftime, and Duke was up 19, and we come home, and I come in the garage, and Kinley has this distraught look on her face, and so does Katie. And Kinley actually, bless her heart, was crying. And she goes, "Dad, Duke lost." I said, "What?" They were up 20 at 19 at halftime. She goes, "It was terrible. It was terrible." So that was our experience of, I like Illinois and I like Duke. Those are my two basketball teams. And both of my teams lost to UConn. So how do you think I feel about UConn right now?
Well, Griffin is rooting for the Eagles and UConn. So he is your moral
he is my adversary in sports fandom, but I still love the kid.
Oh my gosh, this is fantastic. Well, thanks for joining. This was really fun. I don't know what next week we're going to talk about is. We're starting something from scratch. We may do a few hodgepodge weeks of just random topics here. There's a few things some friends have asked about that they're curious about. Maybe we'll talk about those things. But we're really grateful that you're joining and listening, and we'll see you guys next week.